So even scientists admit the fact that factual neutrality and reason alone approaches are impossible because the practice of science rests upon a number of presuppositions about the nature of reality, and we usually take that for granted.
Yeah, so we take for granted the fact that we can know things. We take for granted the orderliness of nature and what we see and that sort of thing. We take it for granted that this experiment that we did yesterday, if we did it again, it'll happen the same way today, right? We just kind of assume that those are presuppositional assumptions about the way the world works, and without them, we could do very little science, or at least we wouldn't even be motivated to do science. But if we thought that the world was just chaotic and anything could happen, then we couldn't come up with any scientific principles and laws because we wouldn't think there are any, right?
Yeah, even the collection of data in my philosophy of science class, we talked about this kind of theoretical scientist who was super smart, and so he decided what he was going to do for the rest of his life until he was 80 years old was to write everything that he possibly observed or seen or did, and he would write it all down, and then at the end of his 80 years, he would give them over to the scientific community and say, "Here, you're welcome." And they would look at it and go, "This says nothing. I mean, these are observations, but we don't know what point they're driving to. We don't know what understanding you're coming from. What the data out there is fine, but you need kind of that filter to let out the things that don't inform anything about what you're observing. How much water is in the ocean isn't going to tell you the makeup of Betelgeuse in the Orion constellation. And so having that is fine, but it's not something that is helpful. And so this kind of approach will help to kind of orientate yourself in an understanding of, okay, exactly what lens am I supposed to be looking through it, rather than every lens or no lens or whatever it is. No one comes to any idea with that. You have your presuppositions, and it's always good to kind of take a look at those presuppositions and make sure that they're in accord with what you actually believe. But that's one of the points that I think the debate within that field brings out well as well. Mm-hmm. So certain operating assumptions are assumed. Otherwise, no science or communication can take place.
Right.
I believe that I can talk to you. I'm talking to you, dear viewer, right now. Can you understand me? Well, I'm going to assume so. Why? Well, because you've clicked on a video. It's in English. You've continued to get to this point. And so we can have an assumption that not only are you listening to this in a language you understand, but there are ideas by these mouth movements that I'm making and vocal cord movements that correspond with things out in the world that you can relate to. So that's one of those things where even communication has an assumption. The issue, however, is how to account for these prior assumptions and how they fit within the context of, for us, a biblical worldview. Mm-hmm. That's what Greg Bahnsen's Against All Opposition does from start to finish.
Yeah.
From the Roman numerals to the very end of the page.
And so Gary DeMar tells us that the Bible shows that apologetics and worldviews in general deal with fundamental assumptions that guide reason and give meaning to facts. Right? A fact becomes evidence that is meaningful when it's applied to a particular theory, mm-hmm. right? Otherwise, it's just something that happens, right? So evidence is when you take a fact and you say, I believe this is the case. Here is this fact, and it, increases the probability of my theory, something like that, right? So that's what we mean by evidence. So we use apologetics, he tells us, every day. Right. Every time we defend our view of a subject over the opinions of others, he says, we are practicing apologetics. It's no less true in the defense of the Christian faith as against all oppositions. And he talks about Paul on Mars Hill. Right. He says Paul makes his defense of the Christian worldview in Athens by confronting a worldview based on Greek philosophy. So notice Paul was confronting a worldview. Mm-hmm. How they viewed the world, what their basic assumptions were about the way the world is or was and how it operated. And so Paul offers an apologia, that's our word for apologetics, right? A defense of the Christian worldview over against the prevailing Greek worldview. That's what Paul was doing. He was making this contrast and showing how the Christian worldview was superior to the Greek worldview in Acts chapter 17.
Yeah. To the unknown God, I will reveal the unknown God to you. Guess what? It's our God. And in fact, all these other gods are false gods. Here's the real one, the one that you're not worshiping. And the reason that they laugh at him, some do, is because he talks about the resurrection of the dead. And so they assumed that all of life is kind of this veil. It's all evil, and really it's only the spiritual world that houses everything. So when you die, that's the ultimate glory is going to Sheol and living from there a good life. And so there's no resurrection of the dead. Again, there's the assumption. There's the clash of the assumptions. And there were some that listened to him, and there were some that believed, and there were some that confronted their assumptions with that and wanted to. And so that's what the end of that story entails for us.